The night Desmond stood in his living room, his shirt slightly rumpled, his eyes bloodshot from alcohol, and his voice dripping with venom, as he spat hateful words at his wife, Vivian, was the night she truly feared she had lost him. Once upon a time, there lived a couple named Vivian and Desmond. Vivian and Desmond had been married for 10 beautiful years, a decade filled with love, faithfulness, and deep respect. Their marriage was one that many envied, a home built on trust and God's guidance, filled with joy, laughter, and unwavering devotion. Desmond, a successful entrepreneur at 40, was a man of integrity, feared God, and adored his wife. He had built his wealth with hard work, yet he remained humble, loyal, and loving. No matter how many women admired him for his status and looks, his heart belonged only to Vivian. Vivian, 5 years younger, had chosen to be a stay-at-home mom, dedicating herself to raising their 2 beautiful children and creating a warm, loving home for her husband. She was graceful, intelligent, and kind, and Desmond made sure she never lacked anything. To those who knew them, their marriage was perfect. But jealousy, like a silent shadow, had begun creeping into their home, disguised as a friend. Stella had been Vivian's closest friend for years. To everyone, she was kind, supportive, and caring. But deep down, she was bitterly envious of Vivian's life. Why did Vivian get to have everything? A wealthy, faithful husband, a comfortable life, a home filled with love. Stella hated it. She knew Desmond was faithful, but that didn't matter. All she needed was to plant doubt and let Vivian destroy her own home from the inside. One afternoon, as they sat in Vivian's luxurious living room, Stella leaned forward, her face filled with fake concern. "Vivian," she sighed, shaking her head, "I didn't want to be the one to tell you this, but as your friend, I can't let you continue living in deception." Vivian frowned. "Tell me what?" Stella hesitated, then whispered, "Desmond is cheating on you." Vivian froze, the words hitting her like a storm. "I've seen him, Vivian," Stella continued, lowering her voice as if sharing a painful truth. "I've caught him with his secretary, Becky, more than once. They think no one notices, but I have." Vivian's heart pounded. "Desmond? Her Desmond?" "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's not possible." Stella sighed. "I know you trust him, but open your eyes, my sister. Men will always be men. Becky is young, beautiful, always around him. Do you really think she sees him as just a boss?" Vivian tried to push away the thought, but the seed of doubt had been planted. And soon, that doubt would turn into destruction. At first, Vivian tried to ignore it. But suddenly, everything Desmond did felt suspicious. How Becky always stayed late at work. How Desmond sometimes smiled when talking about his secretary. How he never noticed how insecure she had suddenly become. The doubt grew and grew, until one night she couldn't hold it in anymore. "Are you sleeping with Becky?" Desmond turned to her, stunned. "Don't lie to me, Desmond." Vivian's voice trembled with anger and pain. "I know what's going on. How long have you been with her? Desmond's expression shifted from shock to hurt. Vivian, he said, softly but firmly, I have never been unfaithful to you. But she didn't believe him. I'm not a fool, she spat. People have seen you two together, laughing, whispering, acting like I don't exist. Desmond stepped closer, his eyes pleading. Vivian, I love you. Becky is just my employee. Then fire her, she interrupted. If you are not cheating, fire her. Desmond's heart sank. He knew Vivian had been influenced by something or someone. But no matter how much he tried to convince her, she refused to listen. And so, with a heavy heart, he made a painful decision. The next day, Becky stood in Desmond's office, shocked and tearful. You are firing me, she whispered. But sir, what did I do? Desmond sighed, his expression pained. Nothing. You did nothing wrong. But my wife believes things that aren't true. And if I don't do this, I will lose my marriage. Tears filled Becky's eyes. Sir, I have worked for you for years. I have been nothing but loyal and respectful. I know, Desmond said, his voice breaking, and I am so sorry. Becky refused the severance pay he offered. She left with a broken heart, and Stella's plan had succeeded. Vivian felt victorious. She had won. Desmond had chosen her over Becky, his secretary. But she had no idea that the true threat had just entered their home. Stella had already set up her next trap, her younger sister. A woman trained to be the perfect replacement. A woman who dressed modestly, spoke softly, and appeared harmless. She applied for Becky's vacant position. Desmond, believing Vivian would approve of a more reserved secretary, hired her. Vivian herself had been there for the interview, approving the woman who would destroy her home. Neither of them knew she was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Neither of them knew she had already been to a native doctor. A sham had been prepared, a spell designed to turn Desmond's heart away from his wife. The moment she started walking, Desmond began to change. At first, it was small, a headache, a feeling of unease. Then his thoughts became cloudy, his discipline slipped. And before long, the man who had once been unshakable in his faithfulness started noticing another woman. A man who never drank found himself in bars and nightclubs. A man who once cherished his wife began calling her ugly and lazy. A man who built his empire on wisdom started losing everything. And Vivian, now living in a nightmare she had unknowingly helped create, could only watch helplessly as her marriage crumbled before her eyes. The once glorious mansion, which had echoed with laughter and love, now felt like a haunted house, cold, distant, and broken. Desmond, the loving husband and devoted father, had become a cruel, heartless man who barely acknowledged his wife and children. The woman he had once adored, the woman he swore to cherish forever, had become nothing more than a burden to him. Vivian could barely recognize her life anymore. Her once faithful husband was now addicted to alcohol and nightlife. He rarely came home before dawn, and when he did, he reeked of expensive perfume that didn't belong to his wife. Vivian. And worst of all, he no longer loved her. He barely looked at her. He had even begun accusing her of infidelity, claiming that their children were not his. Vivian wept in secret every night, wondering how the man she had built her world around could change so drastically in just a few months. She had no idea that her so-called best friend, Stella, and her younger sister had used diabolical charms to enslave her husband's heart. She had no idea that everything, the sudden change, the false accusations, and the reckless spending was all orchestrated by someone she trusted. But God was about to expose the darkness. Vivian had exhausted all options. She had argued, she had pleaded, she had cried. Nothing worked. Desmond had become a different man entirely. He no longer prayed, he no longer spoke kindly to his wife, and he no longer showed any love or concern for their children. The once thriving businesses that had made them wealthy were now failing. Desmond was spending money recklessly on his secretary and her family, buying them cars, houses, and lavishing them with riches, while his own wife and children were left to suffer. One night, after another heart-wrenching argument, Vivian collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. "God, please help me," she cried, her voice breaking. "I don't know what's happening, but if this is a battle, I refuse to lose my marriage to the enemy. Open my eyes, show me the truth." That night, she had a dream. In the dream, she saw herself sitting in a dark pit, shackled in chains. Above her, a shadowy figure laughed cruelly as she struggled to break free. Then suddenly, a bright light appeared, and a man dressed in white stretched out his hand to her. "My daughter," the man's voice echoed, "you have an unfriendly friend. She has been working against you all this time." Vivian gasped. "Who is it?" The man in white stretched his hand, and in the vision she saw Stella, her best friend. She woke up with a start, her body drenched in sweat. Stella? No, it couldn't be. Stella was her best friend. She was the one she had always confided in, the one who had advised her when she suspected Desmond of cheating. But deep down, something in Vivian's spirit told her the dream was a warning. She needed confirmation. The next day, filled with determination, Vivian went to see her pastor. She explained everything, the change in her husband, her failing marriage, her dream. The pastor listened intently before closing his eyes in prayer. After a moment, he opened them and spoke firmly. "My daughter, your dream is a revelation. Stella is not your friend. She is your enemy in disguise. She has been envious of your marriage from the start and has worked tirelessly to destroy it. But do not be afraid. The Lord is about to expose them." Vivian was still struggling to believe it, but the next series of events shattered any doubt she had left. That same week, Stella made a mistake. In her greed and impatience, she forced her younger sister to renew the charm on Desmond to ensure he stayed under their control. But this time, something went terribly wrong. The native doctor had warned them never to break certain spiritual instructions, but in their arrogance, they ignored his words. The charm backfired. The moment Stella's sister attempted to perform the final ritual, a force knocked her to the ground. She screamed, convulsing violently. Stella, horrified, tried to help her, but a sudden fear gripped her heart when her sister's eyes rolled back, and she began to confess against her will. "Desmond was never cheating on you, Vivian," she cried, her voice shaking. "We made you believe he was, so you would force him to sack Becky. We knew she was a good woman, and as long as she was around, he would never fall for our trap. So we lied. We deceived you." Vivian gasped, her heart pounding. Desmond, who had just arrived home, stood at the doorway, his face pale with shock. The younger sister continued, now weeping uncontrollably. "We used shame on him. That's why he stopped loving you. That's why he treated you badly. We wanted him to forget you and marry me, so that we could have all his money. Please forgive me. I didn't know this would happen. Please pray for me or I will die." As soon as he finished speaking, a loud, painful scream filled the air. Stella's body convulsed violently, her eyes bulging with terror, and then she went mad. Her laughter rang through the house like a haunting echo as she ran into the streets, tearing at her clothes, screaming words that no one could understand. Just moments later, she ran into the road and was hit by an oncoming car. She died on the spot. At that very moment, Desmond suddenly collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. His eyes fluttered, and when he looked up at Vivian, his expression changed. It was as if a heavy fog had been lifted from his mind. He blinked in confusion, as if just realizing where he was. "Vivian," his voice cracked, tears filling his eyes. "What happened?" Vivian rushed to his side, weeping as she held him. The spell was broken. Her real husband was back. Desmond sobbed in her arms, overwhelmed by the horror of what he had done while under the manipulation of Stella and her sister. "Please forgive me," he whispered. "I don't know how I let this happen. I don't know how I hurt you like this." Vivian wept as she held him tighter. "It wasn't your fault. It's all my fault. I caused it. Please forgive me." As they cried and embraced, the dark cloud over their home finally lifted. In the weeks that followed, Desmond and Vivian worked hard to rebuild their marriage. They prayed together, they fasted, and they asked God to heal the wounds left behind by the storm. Desmond tracked down Becky and apologized deeply for firing her unjustly. He even gave her back her job with a higher salary. Becky forgave him, overjoyed to see her boss and his wife reunited. Slowly, Desmond's businesses began to recover. Love returned to their home. Happiness was restored. And from that moment forward, Vivian learned the greatest lesson of her life. Not everyone who calls you friend is truly your friend. Evil hides in the heart of those closest to us, but God always has the final say. This is the end of my story.